We'll do the final negotiations with Ms. Rico and Dr. Fenoy. So is there a motion? Motion by Dr. Robinson, second. Second by Mrs. Andrews. Mr. Barbieri, do you accept this motion?
Sure. Yes, thank you.
Any other discussion? If not, we'll call the question. All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries 7-0. The next item is the separation agreement with Dr. Avossa. And Mr. Littlejohn, Ms. Rico, and I had a chance to sit and talk about this because Dr. Avossa had indicated that he is serving at our pleasure at this point in time and is ready and willing to make the transition. Ms. Rico.
Thank you. Just to give some context around how this comes forward, the superintendent's contract goes through the chair to the board. So at this stage, this is, I just wanted to highlight this is for discussion purposes and some concepts for your discussion and those that I believe Mr. Shaw received from Dr. Avossa in terms of suggested exit strategies. So it's certainly for your discussion. The board has not had a chance to really give anybody any direction. And so we're here with essentially a straw man for your consideration, and we can walk through what those concepts are as well.
Okay, and the provisions on this are essentially really three things. It's just to have a separation, and my recommendation for you all to discuss is that when Dr. Fenoy signs the contract, we can't have two superintendents. So next week on the 14th, Dr. Fenoy would be sworn in and become superintendent. At that point in time, that would be the date that Dr. Avossa would leave us as superintendent. And he had no expectations of anything other than what he's entitled to under the contract of sick leave and vacation time. There was an FRS issue, an FRS issue that he needs to, some money that needs to be reimbursed the district that was fine with him. And the only thing that we put in there, and this is where I think the board needs to give direction, was that in the event that Dr. Fenoy wants any consultant time to work with Dr. Avossa for whatever number of days you have, if you don't want to do it, we don't have to, but to designate a certain number of days that at the pleasure of the new superintendent, that Dr. Avossa would be made available for conferences and discussions, and his pay would be simply what his daily rate was during that time. Ms. Rico.
Thank you. So to clarify, we'll need to have sort of a simultaneous start and end for the purpose that Mr. Shaw indicated. So it would contemplate that we would have a fully signed and executed, agreed upon contract by the new superintendent, by Dr. Fenoy. But assuming that that's done, the same day we would execute this termination, or at the same time execute this termination, Dr. Avossa's services would be completely, his contract would be ended at that juncture. So there's no continuing on in another role or anything like that. It's totally done. And then the board can contemplate, as Mr. Shaw indicated, whether or not you want to authorize additional days up to a certain amount for these consulting services, as he indicated.
Discussion on those items. Mr. Barbieri.
Yeah, Mr. Shaw, I suggest we ask Dr. Fenoy how many days he would like to have Dr. Avossa here to help him, and we leave it up to the two of them to tell us what they'd like, and then deal with it that way.
All right. I think that's a good idea. So, Mrs. McQuinn.
Yeah, I agree. So Dr. Fenoy could come to us requesting that he wants that assistance, right? I just don't want him put in a tough position that he feels that he has to have that assistance.
Okay, good point. Mrs. Brill.
Well, but again, that's, I was going to say the same thing as Mr. Barbieri. It's his choice, and he may want it. So I think we just leave that open to Dr. Fenoy, to his best judgment, and leave it at that.
Ms. Rico, and that one, then the provisions in the agreement could be written to allow this without setting a certain number of days.
Well, You could do it one of two ways. One, you could set some days in this agreement as it was submitted, where you would limit the number of days and up to 5 days or up to so many within a certain amount of time, because you don't want this to go on to next year. And leave that up to the new superintendent to determine that call and arrange for it, and it would be covered under the contract in terms of authority. However, the other fact of the matter is that there is a consulting professional services authority that goes up to $25,000 for any superintendent. So we could eliminate that from this agreement, and should the new superintendent wish to engage for consulting services, he can do that under his own signature within that amount of,
Mr. Barbieri and then Mrs. McQuinn.
Mrs. Rico, are we going to run afoul of the policy that says you can't be a consultant to the district after you leave employment? Because we got to be careful how we word this,
That's
otherwise
true.
we're violating our policy.
that's true. That's true. So it should be contained in here. Thank you.
Right. Mrs. McQuinn.
Okay, no, hearing that, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Barbieri. That one I think was about to slip by us, so thank you. All right, let's deal with two issues then. Is everybody comfortable with us having the exit date as next Wednesday after or whatever time Dr. Fenoy, we approve his contract? So if it's for some reason doesn't happen next week, then it'll be then. All right, do we need a motion on that, or can that be just consensus of the board?
I would prefer clear direction so that we know we're
All right,
going to bring it
we'll
back on
entertain a
Wednesday.
motion to have March 14th be the designated exit date for Dr. Avossa. Motion. We need a motion first.
Unless we can't get it done by the 14th, then it's got to be the
Right,
date that
okay.
Dr. Fenoy is actually
Okay.
sworn in, right?
Right, yeah. All right, so we need a motion then. Mrs. Brill moves that we give it on the date that Dr. Fenoy is approved and sworn in. All right, we need a second? Second by Mrs. Andrew. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? All opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Second issue is to include a number of days in the agreement. Do you all want to do a recommended number of days now, or leave it up to Dr. Fenoy to recommend that, and then that can come back to us on the 14th when we do it? All right, so we'll leave that part empty. So we don't need to vote on that, Ms. Rico. All right, with that, I think that concludes that item. Our last item was just a house cleaning thing in the event that there was something we didn't cover today. So before we adjourn, is anybody aware of anything we have not dealt with today that we need to deal with? Again, thank you very much, board. You all did a great job tonight, and I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion, second, all in favor. We stand adjourned.